So welcome to the Friday edition of Unexpected Points. Hopefully I'm sounding okay here. I realized my mic wasn't even plugged in until right before this, but we're doing it live. We're doing it live. What was the Bill O'Reilly? I think that was the Bill O'Reilly current affairs. And we're doing it live. So we are doing it live here, folks. On YouTube, if anyone wants to tune in the future, I'm going to do these 3 p.m.-ish, probably mostly 2 p.m.-ish going forward. I didn't do one last week because, let's face it, it's getting pretty low in terms of the amount of actual, like, tangible news that we can talk about. I have a few things to talk about this week with some player releases for Hopkins, which I talked about a little bit a couple of weeks ago, and then now Dalvin Cook being added to the mix. I looked up some research, put out some stuff next week about the probability that they can have like a bounce back type of season, because both of their numbers had fallen off by my preferred valuation metric. And I can sum it up, not great, Bob. That's the sum it up for their chances of having a bounce back. So we'll talk about them. We'll talk about rule changes in the NFL. I want to talk about the kickoff rule a little bit. Try not to be too overconfident in my take, but I think some people are bowing down to the authority of special teams coaches a little bit too much in assuming that there are problems with this new kickoff rule. But we'll discuss it and keep an open mind to it. And then, of course, we'll do Q&A. So I'll go ahead and just put it in the comments here. I'll say drop Q&A here. Get on YouTube, guys. Subscribe to the Unexpected Points YouTube channel. Find this and get on here and drop me any Q&A that I'll eventually end up getting to. Shouldn't be too long. Hopefully we can wrap up my other talking points within 15, 20 minutes or so. So let's talk Hopkins and now Dalvin Cook. So the only thing I'll say about both of these releases is we don't know behind the scenes what the negotiations were like. Presumably, both players were offered some sort of, you restructure the contract, you bring down the amount, and we'll see if we can work with it. Presumably, trades were explored where, again, if they would bring down that contract amount, maybe there could have been some sort of trade, and just nothing materialized. Remember, you're trading for contracts. You're not trading for players. For Hopkins, we're talking about trading for a player who was going to be scheduled to make $15-16 million a year. For Dalvin Cook, we're talking about a contract where he signed that extension, and then for this season, his base salary for this season, $10.4 million. Hey, the guarantees, minor on there. So that's what they end up doing. Having to release him there. It's just, you're not going to find a lot of guys that they're going to be paid that amount. If you go to, our friends at OTC and you look up the positional table here for running backs for this season, let's see where Cook ranks here. Let's just look at this 1 year rather than looking at the full contract amounts. So if we bring up the cash spent amount for these guys this year, Cook was going to be number 5 in the NFL at 11 million cash. The only guys are higher cash spent this year is Bijan Robinson. Now that includes his signing bonus, I'm pretty sure there. Christian McCaffrey at 12 million. Kamara at 11 million is tied with Aaron Jones, and then also tied with Dalvin Cook. So you could really say he's tied for third as far as what the cash spend was going to be this year for Cook. And then his cap number at 14 million, a little bit over 14.1 million, is only behind Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb. So whatever you think about Dalvin, that's what you're dealing with as far as his relative value. That's what the market is telling us about these running backs, how much you think they are worth or not. And I looked at Cook's career by my plus minus metric. For those who haven't read the pieces and the research that I put out on what I call NFL plus minus, I called it PFF plus minus before, back when RIP to my PFF career. There, and it's basically looking at on-off splits, clustering players, similar players, and then doing some regressions on it to try to get a points-based number for how much a player is worth over, the replacement type of level player. So for Cook, this last season, not good. Down to his negative 4.7. And this is kind of versus, your average-ish sort of backup. So negative 4.7 points, whereas in 2021, it was about 6 points. In 2020, he peaked out with over 20 points. That was a huge season for him in 2020. In 2019, it was about 10 points. And then his first couple of seasons, he was good, not great. So his production, not only by aggregate stats, not only by your counting stats that most people are going to judge running backs by, because we really have nothing better. Or at least people are not familiar with anything better to look at. They're going to say, hey, he played 17 games. He put up 1,100 yards. He had 8 touchdowns. Not bad for him. Well, down to 4.4 yards per carry is part of it. 8 touchdowns, again, not great on it. And then for the receiving is concerned, yards per target receiving, about 5 yards per target receiving. So when you look at something like that, and I'm combining other metrics in here where I look at broken tackles and things like that are tracked by PFF that I can put into this metric, just not that impressive of a season for him. Definite fall off for him. And he's hitting what's going to be his age 28 season. Now, again, the big season he had, 2020, a lot of that was driven by the 5.0 yards per carry and the 16 touchdowns. And touchdowns are probably a little bit overweighted. Also 6.7 yards per target there versus 5.3 in the most recent season. So more efficient catching the ball too. And so a lot of that, though, is maybe a little bit overweighted because it's looking at his ability to score touchdowns there, and you get a lot of EPA for that final yard getting into the end zone. And that'll filter through to this points-based formula for him. But basically what I would say is if you're looking at Cook and you say, oh, well, 4 straight Pro Bowls here, he hasn't really fallen off. No, the numbers have fallen off some. And when you combine that with the fact that we just know running backs entering their late 20s have a severe fall off, it's going to be difficult to justify keeping them on that top-notch type of contract. And what I did was I looked at other historical numbers, and I said, Cook was relatively young entering the NFL, but Cook right now just completed his 6th NFL season. So if we look at other running backs in the past, and including everyone here, not just guys who have fallen off to see whether they can come back or not, but looking at anyone in the last 10 years who is entering their 7th season or later for running backs, what's the best NFL plus minus number that we have? Well, there are only 4 seasons for guys who are in their 7th season or later. There's only 4 years, 4 individual seasons out of 123 where they produced at least 10 in plus minus, 10 points in plus minus. Mark Ingram in 2019. I don't know what you want to say about that one. I think that could have been that's the Lamar Jackson effect, right? Let's look here. I'm assuming that was a Ravens season. Let me just confirm before I start spouting off here. Yeah, that was the Lamar Jackson effect. He had 1,000 yards and averaged 5 yards per carry. But that was one of those years where like everyone on the Ravens had this insane yards per carry. If you took their yards above expected based upon the model formula where they look at where all the defenders are and the offensive players are, and you try to get their expected yards, there was this weird thing, which I don't think was captured properly in that model, where all the Ravens rushing backs are always super high on that. And, including Mark Ingram. So we have that Ingram season in there, and that was his age 30 season. So that's a couple of years older than Cook right now. So we have that season who falls into this. We have Dion Lewis in 2017. So I guess that was with the Titans then. So Dion Lewis, 2017 season. Oh no, that's his last season in New England. He was still in New England there. Was it 896 yards rushing? Played all 16 games, 5.0 yards per carry, and yards per target over 6. So a very efficient season there. So that one for him. Although, again, it's one of those things where it wasn't really his 7th season in the league because he had missed so many years, but it was his 7th year post, like if you count his rookie year as year 1, then it was year number 7 because it was 2017 when he came into the league in 2011. But he had not much mileage to that point. To that point in his career for Lewis, he had, let's see here, 140 carries total. And then in this one season, he had 180 carries and an additional 32 receptions that year. So we have that season from Lewis. The Ingram to Lewis season, LaShawn McCoy in 2016. That was his 8th season in the year. And that's really it. Nobody else stacks up here. Jerick McKinnon last year came close. Mark Ingram another year came somewhat close. But really, you're just getting pretty meh production. You're not getting these big production numbers. And you have a lot of guys who have severely negative production who were formerly good players here. I mean, Le'Veon Bell had one of the worst years as far as plus minus is concerned in 2019 when he eventually, played that season with the Jets. Some other guys in here who kind of fell off a bit when they hit that point in their career. Melvin Gordon, a pretty ugly number last season, and that was his 8th season in the NFL at that point in time. So he fell off quite a bit here. David Johnson, another guy who fell off a ton after having a big year before. That was his 7th NFL season 2 years ago in 2021, where he had a big negative number. DeMarco Murray in 2017 with the Titans. That was his 7th year in the NFL, and he fell off a cliff and really never came back for there. So Cook is just right on the precipice of this area where the running backs fall off and they don't come back. The thing you could critique the Vikings on here, and the Cardinals to a degree too, is the timing of the release. I just don't we knew there was no way they were going to not release him and save the cap space here unless they could get him to write down that number a lot. Knowing how their negotiations have gone in the past, knowing the agent for Cook, I think the guy's name is Zach Hiller, very aggressive agent. I'm sure he's out there. I don't follow him on Twitter anymore, but I'm sure he's out there touting how the team, falls apart whenever they don't have Dalvin Cook in the lineup, because that's what he would do in the past. They probably just weren't going to be amenable to taking a cut the entire time. So knowing that, Vikings probably should just let him go earlier, because I do think this is the toughest time in the cycle to make a trade. It's the toughest time in the cycle for players to be signed somewhere else, because you have free agencies come and gone. So everyone thinks at least that they've upgraded it at all these different positions, and they think the positions that were solid last season will continue to be solid here. You have the draft. You have undrafted free agents that you brought in. It's the one most optimistic time when teams are looking at their roster. They're more optimistic right now than they are at any other point in the cycle as to what will actually happen. A lot of these running backs and wide receivers on teams are going to flop. A lot of them are going to get injured. A lot of them are just not going to be ready if they're rookies, but we don't know that at this point. So laying out big money or big guarantees for Cook or for Hopkins, and remember, for veteran contracts, after week 1, the whole thing becomes guaranteed. So signing a big contract, there's no real way, if you're going to bring someone in like Cook or Hopkins, that you can protect yourself unless you're going to, again, cut them before the season even starts. And that's probably unlikely if you're bringing them in at this point. So you're kind of wedded to paying the entire number for them. There're just not going to be a lot of teams that are looking for it, especially for Cook. For Hopkins, now we look at his numbers, and I wanted to say, okay, let's look at wide receivers who are entering, I believe it's their 10th season. So let's look at Hopkins, because Hopkins just completed, he just completed year number 10 in the NFL. So we're talking about the 11th season here. So if we go 11th season and on, and we don't have the biggest database here when looking at that for these numbers, We only have 42 seasons that I have to look at in my database here, but only 2 of those seasons I have guys who put up more than 10 and only barely more than 10 in plus minus. Who those years? One, Ted Ginn, 2017, and then another one in his 11th season, and then in Antonio Brown's 12th season in 2021, he had about 11 points added in plus minus and a pretty good per game number, really, really strong per game number because he only played 7 games. So that was really the only outstanding season that I have here over about the last 10 years. Well, it's a little bit less than 10 years, but it's probably more like the last 6 years because it's looking only at players who are old enough to qualify here for guys who had really, really efficient season. And it's really just Antonio Brown over those 7 games in 2021. And Ginn was okay over a full 17 games. Some other guys had some sparks. DeSean Jackson in 2019, he did okay for a few games, but that's about it. Everyone else is very low. T.Y. Hilton was okay last year for the Cowboys in his 11th season, but guys like Hilton that we're looking at, people think he's completely over the hill. Well, not completely, but they're pretty sure he's over the hill at this point. That's the same. Last year, T.Y. Hilton is the same year that we're talking about for Hopkins. Now, Hopkins was younger coming in, so he has a little bit of an age advantage there, but still, that's what we're looking at. And if you look at guys who really just flopped as they got on beyond their age 11 season, I mean, there are a lot. Golden Tate in here, Brandon Marshall, Marvin Jones Jr., Emmanuel Sanders, Julio Jones, RIP. Julio last season was pretty bad, and that was Julio's 12th season, so about a year more than what we're talking about for Hopkins. A lot of these guys just fall off a cliff. So it's not that Hopkins can't bounce back. It's not an impossibility, but there just aren't a lot of historical precedent for seeing this other than Antonio Brown. And I think what you've also seen, and there's been studies on this, is that the smaller wide receivers tend to age better than bigger wide receivers. Hopkins isn't the biggest wide receiver, but what is he, like 215 or something like that? I mean, he's a pretty big. He's on the bigger side for wide receivers. Those guys just don't seem to age out as well as the smaller wide receivers do. So that's probably going to be one of the problems we're talking about here for Hopkins, and see whether someone will sign him. All right, let's talk quickly about the rule change. I want to talk about this kickoff rule a little bit, only in we don't have a lot to talk about right now. But for those who don't know, the new kickoff rule is if you can fair catch the ball in the field of play and it automatically goes out to the 25-yard line. So it's not, touchback goes out to the 25. Remember, that was an adjustment that they made a number of years ago to try to encourage fewer kickoff returns, basically, is allowing the touchback to go out to the 25 instead of the 20 to incentivize that a little bit. Now, some teams have tried to not kick it in the end zone and make teams return it. And I think they just want fewer and fewer of these types of plays in the NFL. The NFL doesn't want them because it has by far and away the highest concussion rate of any play in the NFL. And it's not really the returners we're talking about here. It's really the guys who are either on coverage or blocking that have the high concussion rate. I think there's something like 19 concussions last season on kickoffs. And if you think about these kickoffs, they're only actually being returned somewhere around 40% of the time. So around 60% of the time, we're getting balls that are touchbacks anyway, or I guess in rare occasion going out of bounds. So they're only being returned 40% of the time now. They're trying to lower it even further with this rule. It was something that was unanimously panned by coaches, but the NFL basically, kind of twisted the arm of the competition committee and others to approve this rule. It's a trial rule, just like the when they opened up DPI, defensive pass interference, to review, and then it just expired after a year. This also will expire after a year if they decide not to make it a permanent rule. Now, the coaches don't like it, and I'm open to objections to this, but I don't know. I haven't seen anything that I find convincing, because there's one Saints coach in particular, whose name is, let me get it right, Darren Rizzi, a longtime special teams coordinator. Mike Triplett who was a reporter, formerly ESPN. I think he's at NewOrleans.com, NewOrleansFootball.com. which is it New Orleans football? I want to make sure I'm saying the right thing here. It is New Orleans football. So that's an operation that was an independent operation that was started there. So he says that he's been an advisory, this special teams coordinator for the Saints. He's been an advisor. He thinks, number one, he said this, and a few other people have said that they think there could be unintended consequences where there are even more returns than they think because of this. I don't know. And he mentioned squib kicks as a potential, because if you squib it, they can't fair catch it. They're forced to return it. I don't know. There are always going to be unintended consequences, right? But the thing is, what we have here, which makes me confident that we're not going to see more returns or uglier returns or more squib kicks, we do have the fact that college already has this rule change. And squib kicks actually went down. And even now, where you're able to get a lot of hang time on the kickoff, and you have the ability to potentially, if you have a really good kicker who can keep the ball up in the air and target inside the 5-yard line, even now the average kick that's fielded right outside the goal line is taken back to something like the 23-yard line on average. Now, the median is a bit shorter. It's only, around the 20, 21. So like a squib kick's not going to be better than that. You're not going to be able to have more precision than that. Every now and again, an up man in the blocking lineup is going to be able to grab it. You're going to get out well past the 25. You have less control directionally with a squib kick. It could just bounce out of bounds, which gives the ball to the team at the 40-yard line. And because it's lower and there's not as much hang time, you just don't have as much time to even get down and cover it. So, I just figure squib kicks on average are going to be taken out to further than the 25. So it really, why would you do that? And again, squib kicks did not go up in college when they introduced this rule. So when coaches are saying this, and I've seen multiple coaches use this as a talking point, special teams coordinators use it as a talking point, the squib kick thing, I don't think the evidence points in that direction. Actually, I know the evidence doesn't point in that direction. Is it possible the evidence is wrong and there's something different about college than about the pros? Possibly. But I think the evidence and the logic, which is logically, these squib kicks are just going to be bad. You'd rather have teams fair catch it, is possible. The other thing that was mentioned by coaches, which I think is interesting, is because if it's a muffed kick, if you do a fair catch and you muff it, in other words, you drop it, you can't return it. So if, let's say that the ball was going to land on the 5, you signal for a fair catch, you muff it, it goes through your arms, it hits the ground, and then you pick it up. Well, you get the ball at the 5-yard line. So the thought was, because of the risk of having the ball at the 5-yard line, that no one's going to exercise this option anyway. No one's going to fair catch it anyway, knowing that if you muff it, you're in bad shape. I guess the evidence here that the NFL has provided, the people for the rule change have provided, is, less than 1% of kicks are muffed anyway. So it's a very rare occurrence. So that's their counter to that argument. And, it makes sense to me. So again, I've seen people sharing these comments by this Darren Rizzi, where he says squib kicks may happen. He says I don't think there's evidence that says that it's going to help prevent concussions, where, we've had a trial run on this in college and it's helped. Fewer returns. Now, it is going to be fewer returns. If you're just not into returns, that's fine. If you're into returns and you just want more of those, then yeah, it's going to be bad for that. Maybe it'll eventually play its way out of returns. The other thing that Rizzi mentions here is there are other changes, like moving the kickoff back to the 20-yard line to create more space. That doesn't make any sense to me. I know that's what they're doing in the USFL with their new rule, but moving it back is to encourage more returns. And the USFL does that, but the USFL forces teams to line up in a way where the blockers are closer to where it's being kicked off and have to run back simultaneously so they don't slam into each other in the same sort of way. But the USFL is getting like 90% of the kicks are now being returned versus 40 something percent in the NFL. That's for more returns. That's probably more concussions. I know the USFL has said that their injury rates have been pretty good. I don't have all the data behind that to say whether it's true or not, but that seems to me logically to be like counterintuitive and probably not correct. Like making it a longer kickoff, I don't see how that's going to make anything safer by giving more room to the guys. I don't see it. I don't see it. It's just going to have more returns. Again, 90 something percent of the kicks are being returned in the USFL. Just that by itself. So even if you lower the concussion rate, somehow you'd have to lower it by a factor of, 50% just to keep the number of concussions the same, because twice as many kicks are going to be taken out on this one. But it's a one-year rule and it's everything else. So I would say is before you just say, oh, coaches are upset about this. And again, the talking points here, if you just think a little bit logically about this, the talking points don't quite seem to hold up. I was going to ask friend of the show, Mike Lopez, who I'm sure was involved in this. Of course, he was involved, I'm pretty sure, in getting DPI to be reviewed. And then that kind of flopped out when the refs refused to call it. I'm sure that he helped put together a lot of the data on this. And I think just safety is going to conflict. And I don't know if coaches are purposefully are like cynically against this rule change because they just want more returns. But it is a thing that special teams is under attack in the NFL. If you think about it, like going for it on fourth down, not having kickoffs, all these sorts of things take away from the special teams reps, which is becoming less and less of a thing. But I just think the kickoff maybe eventually will go the way of the dodo bird here. Because at a certain point, you're just looking for your excitement, your entertainment value that you're getting versus the cost of concussions. And I'm not sure it's there. I know a lot of guys prove themselves on special teams as their way to get into the NFL in other ways, but I don't know. We'll have to figure out other ways for guys to get in and get on the roster there. All right, let's go to Q&A here. Again, anyone who wants to leave comments here on YouTube that is listening along to me ramble on here about exciting things like kickoff rules, go ahead and drop one in there and I'll get through these and we'll all go about our weekends here. All right, this is from Man from BC. So I'll put this up here. It says, based on actual value created on the football field, QBs are often considered underpaid still. If you allocate salary cap solely based on value, how much of the cap would go to each position? That's a good question. Now, I think this is a issue with valuation in the context of separating it out and valuing each player by a number metric and each position by a number metric versus how you're going to build a roster. Because you're right. I mean, if we're talking about, for instance, this plus minus metric that I have, the best non-quarterback types of seasons are going to be in the 30 to 40 range. Okay. So let's think about that in our heads. 30 to 40 range are the best seasons. And if a quarterback is injured, the best way I think to think about that is you're going to lose on the spread, depending on how good that quarterback is, how good the backup is, all this sort of stuff. It's going to be, I don't know, 3 to a max of maybe 7 points if we're talking about a really big quarterback. I guess it could be more. I think when Aaron Rodgers went out back in 2017, it might have been even higher when he got injured for that season. But even so, let's just say 5 points for a quarterback going out. Oh, let's make it lower. Say 4 points. So 4 points is like the predictive amount for a quarterback going out. So 4 points times, say 16 games rather than 17 games because quarterbacks are going to miss some games. So then we got 40, we got 6 times 4. So that's another 24. So we're talking about 64 points. So that's already way more than the biggest NFL seasons that I have for other positional players. And those other positional players' big seasons, that's not like a predicted amount moving forward. That's backwards looking, right? When lines are moving for quarterbacks getting injured and they move by a lot, that's forwards looking. So even if you had a non-positional player who generated, let's say, 30 something points of value last year, which is about a win, a little bit like a win, let's say a win and change, they're probably not going to do that again. Like if you're probably not going to have an outlier type of season 2 years in a row. So I think looking forward for most players, you could maybe assume at best like a point per game for a positional type of player. So like a 16, 17 points versus 3 to 4 points a game for a quarterback. Now, if you look at that metric and you say, okay, well, let's apply this to contracts. Well, that would say quarterbacks should be making, 2.5, 3 times what any other player in the league is. And obviously, that's getting close to the case, but it's not the case. You still have players who are close to, let's say, 30, and then quarterbacks who are more now getting into the 50s. But it would say like at least twice as much. So if you apply that, you'd say quarterbacks are still undervalued. You say quarterbacks should be making somewhere around the like 75 to 80 million type of number. And then you should figure out over the rest of the team how to divide up the 140 million that you're going to have left over at that point. I still think we probably should be closer to that than we are in the NFL as far as paying quarterbacks, but I get it that because of the market dynamics, you're not just going to be the one team to go out and do that, especially when you have quarterbacks. You can use the franchise tag, you can do these other things that the way they currently are. But yeah, no, I would say relative to, if you look at that pure points basis, quarterbacks are still going to be undervalued. And as much as people want to say it, that's not the case, or think that these other positions are worth a lot, just look at the betting markets. Unless you have a cluster of non-quarterback injuries, barely moves ever going forward. And it'll move again. When Aaron Rodgers is out and you have to bring in Brett Hundley, it moves like 7 points, which is just an enormous number. Absolutely enormous number. We're talking about over 100 points of value over a course of a season. And just no non-quarterback player is going to come close to that one. The rest of the positions, as far as my valuations have shown, edge rusher, wide receiver are kind of in a tier, along with interior pass rush are in a tier there. Second tier is really almost cornerback by themselves. Really great safety coverage is okay there. Tackles is in that first tier also, I forgot to mention. And then we're talking about guards and linebackers, if they're really good coverage linebackers. And then safeties are pretty low. And, of course, running backs are pretty low. And then we get into the special teamers. This is from Lucas. Can you speak to Joe Mixon's non-release considering his contract and age? Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think for Mixon, I thought there was a better chance that he would get released. But let's remember, he did sign this extension that goes through 2024. So the release here, let's pull it up, would be 10 million in cap savings, which is interesting. There's a 12 million cap number, 9.4 million base salary. Yeah, that one's a weird one to me as to why they don't release him. But they obviously had not really planned for this, because if you look at the depth chart for the Bengals and at running back here, Chase Brown, number 2, according to ESPN, Travion Williams, and then Chris Evans, who's been there for a while. Yeah, they got nothing there. So they're kind of just planning on rolling forward, I think, here with Mixon. Maybe this would probably be his last season, although, yeah, no, there's really no guarantees here. So I'm kind of shocked, honestly. They just have to eat the cap. I mean, eat the signing bonus here. So yeah, I don't know what's going on with the Bengals, but they're not planning at all for letting Mixon go. They must really care about him here, because P. Ryan left also, and they really did nothing to fill it. So I don't know. It's a head scratcher for me, honestly. Okay, last question we got in the queue here. We might get out of here super early today. This will be good. Q&A. Given the NFC's talent gap relative to the AFC, do you expect to see a disproportionate amount of teams tanking in 23? No, I don't seem to see that. I don't think we'll see that. If you look at the teams, I think, who are in a situation where they can realistically tank. Well, actually, I don't want to say it too quickly, no, because disproportionate, everything is still relative, though. So I do think there might be more teams who are willing mid-season, because we've seen more liquidity, let's say, in trade markets, right? So if we get more liquidity midway through the season, I think there might be more teams who are willing just to trade away pieces in the middle of the season if things aren't going well. Number one, you get better valuations, I think, than anything else. And then just be willing to bottom out in a way in order to get up near the top of the draft to get that quarterback. Teams that I would think of who are in this situation that maybe the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, although Todd Bowles probably gets fired under that situation, but they'd be a team where they have players like, let's say Mike Evans, that they could look to trade to a contender and probably get the most that they could get for him mid-season if a team can free up some cap room for him. So that would be a possibility. I think the Buccaneers. The Cardinals, they have a pretty good runway as far as having a first-year head coach and first-year GM where they could bottom out a little bit more easily. Maybe they just don't bring Kyler back at all. That would be a way to achieve bottoming out. But other than that, I don't know if there's a lot of teams that you can point to that would be able to credibly do that, and the head coach and GM not have to worry about losing their jobs in the process of doing that. I mean, a sneaky one, and I don't think this is really going to happen, but just looking at a sneaky one is the Rams, I guess. Although, I don't know. I mean, Stafford's coming back. This is probably Aaron Donald's last season. They haven't had picks in so long. Could they start trading off some guys? I mean, they've already been releasing, obviously, in the offseason. Could they look to potentially trade someone mid-season? Maybe. The sneaky one is the Rams. Another sneaky one, because I think LaFleur could withstand this, is the Packers. Like, if the Packers start going down, I don't know. You got Bakhtiari's getting a little bit up there in age. Could they look to trade him away, eat a bunch of cap in doing so, bottom out? And if Jordan Love just isn't the guy, he could be a good, like, tanking type of quarterback. But I don't really see anyone else. I don't know if there's any other ideas out there for other teams that could really credibly do this with their current situation. I mean, the Commanders would be a choice, but the thing is, they still got Rivera there. And I think he holds a lot of sway in the front office too. So, like, he'd have to get fired mid-season, and then maybe they could think about selling off some pieces and things like that. But the only reason I think it might be a little bit more prevalent this year is because of teams' willingness to make mid-season trades. If that's going to go up proportionally to their willingness that we've seen in the offseason to make trades, then that'll work. Then that will also help teams be able to bottom out in those situations. All right, that's the Q&A here. Again, drop me any comments on Substack if you want me to address some questions for next week. Otherwise, have a good weekend, everyone here. And next week, I'll be coming at you talking to Seth Partnow, who's at StatsBomb now, formerly of the Minnesota Timberwolves analytics department there. But he's working StatsBomb, which is going to be doing stuff on the American football side, plus eventually I think they're going to get into the NBA. So we'll be talking football and basketball. And then 2 weeks from now, I'm going to have Ben Taylor on the pod, who works thinking basketball is his thing. Incredible work. I was following Ben before he blew up, and now his YouTube channel gets like hundreds of thousands of views. Now he's doing videos for the NBA. I was someone who followed him way back when he just had his Back Picks, I want to say, is the site, and his GOAT 40 list, which I loved. So we'll be talking a lot of basketball. Maybe it's how it relates to football too, but he'll be another guy that I'm going to talk to in a couple of weeks, and some other good interviews I'm going to get lined up again. Some of them may not be football related, but always tangentially or always related to some analytical stuff that we can talk about. Review the pod on iTunes if you get a chance. 5 stars only, please. And otherwise, I'll be talking to everyone next week. Thanks so much for the time.